Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back. Nice to see you guys. We have a full schedule today. I'm going to start with teaching you guys the meditation to eliminate sexual cravings. There's actually two types of meditation here. It's the same goal, but there's one that the Buddha did during his lifetime, and there's one that we do now, which is essentially accomplishing the same thing. So I'm going to teach that to you, and then we're going to actually do it. Then I'm going to move into teaching you dependent origination. This is the highest teaching of the Buddha, where you're going to learn about exactly what's leading to your rebirth and your discontentedness. Then we're going to be talking about the fetter of ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. This is the fetter of all fetters that needs to be eliminated in order to get to enlightenment along with all the others. And then this afternoon, when we come back, or this evening at 6:30, I'm going to be teaching you how to know that your mind is enlightened. I'll teach you about continued support, and we'll have a closing discussion. Actually, it is this afternoon. It's not this evening. Yeah, because we're just taking a short lunch today. So this is our plan for today. So let me just jump right in and start sharing with you guys the teachings on meditation to eliminate sexual cravings. The first thing that I'll share is this meditation is only needed in certain situations. Some people will need this, some people won't necessarily need it. Anybody who's going to ultimately get to enlightenment will eliminate sexual contact 100%. When you're in that second stage of enlightenment, someone may still be having sex at that point, but then ultimately moving into the third stage and to the fourth stage where the mind's actually enlightened, an individual would have eliminated sexual cravings. And sometimes you need help to do this. For some people, you don't necessarily need this meditation to be able to do that. So you might use this in order to eliminate your sexual cravings and your desires, because as long as you have that in the mind, there's going to be agitation, there's going to be frustration, because having sexual contact is not permanent. And when you're able to get it and you feel all those pleasant feelings, you'll feel great, and then that'll fade away because it's only temporary. But then when you can't receive sexual contact, you're going to be agitated or frustrated or annoyed. So as long as the desire for sex is in the mind, it's going to produce discontentedness. Or perhaps someone might use this meditation. Say that they're currently maybe having 5, 6, 8, 10 different boyfriends or girlfriends right now, and maybe they're being unfaithful in their relationships, and they're having the interest to now move down to just one relationship. Maybe they've learned these teachings, they realize it's unwise to have multiple sexual partners at one time, and now they would like to bring their practice down to just having one partner. Well, if that's the case, they might have a certain amount of sexual cravings that they need this meditation to bring that down so that they can now have a committed relationship with just one person. So these are the two situations that someone might end up using this particular meditation. It's not like you do it one time and you're going to immediately eliminate your sexual cravings, or even 10 or 20 times. It's going to take gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress so that you can gradually eliminate this out of the mind. An individual would already have developed a breathing mindfulness meditation practice, generosity. They would develop the Eightfold Path. That's a foundation for all these teachings. But then at some point, as a specialized meditation, if somebody's interested in to move into this particular meditation, then they could do this. Another situation where someone might be interested to do this is if you're indulging in pornography or masturbation continuously, and you would like to bring that sexual craving down or eliminate it. This is another situation where you might use this. So first, I'm going to teach you the 32-part body meditation, which is what the Buddha taught during his lifetime. And then I'll teach you guys what we do today, which is kind of a variation of this. What the Buddha taught is that in order to develop the elimination of sexual cravings, you would need to develop the unattractiveness of the body, where you no longer see the body as being attractive. Because we do all kinds of things to this physical body in order to make it look appealing and interesting for people to actually be interested to have sexual contact with us. We do things to the hair, we do things with jewelry or makeup or clothing, or might even wear scents like colognes or perfumes. We do all kinds of things in order to create interest in on the part of someone else to be interested in having sex with us. So now when the mind's looking at that, you're not seeing true reality. You're seeing this outer shell. And what the Buddha is teaching you to be able to do is to be able to see true reality, the various individual bits and pieces and parts of the body, so that now you can develop this unattractiveness of the body. Rather than clinging to the perception that the body is attractive, he's helping you to be able to transform your perception and your perspective and being able to see the body as unattractive. Because if somebody ripped off the skin of the body and there was like, okay, go have sex with that person, you probably wouldn't be interested in having sex with someone whose skin was completely ripped off. So essentially what this meditation is doing is helping you to walk through and be able to see each individual bit and piece and part of the body and be able to develop the unattractiveness of the body where you no longer see it as being attractive. So what you do is you close your eyes. You can do chanting going in. You can also do breathing mindfulness meditation going in. Ultimately, you would memorize these, and then you would envision each one of them as you're walking through the meditation. But when you're first learning, you need to keep your eyes open to be able to look at each one of these. And what you would do is you would look at the head hair. You would know, okay, head hair. And now you might close your eyes and you envision the head hair and kind of all the little individual pieces and parts of the head hair. And then after you've done that for a period of time, maybe a few seconds or a minute or so, you then go to the body hair and looking at all the body hair with your eyes closed, you're envisioning this. And you walk through each one of these, the nails, like the fingernails and toenails, think about the dirt and maybe longer ones or discoloration. You think about the teeth, the different shape and color and texture and kind of the discoloration of those. The skin, the flesh, the sinews, the bones, bone marrow, kidneys, each one of these things you go all the way through. And even the bile, the phlegm, the pus, the blood, the sweat, the fat, tears, grease, saliva, mucus, oil of the joints, and urine. And what this is organized in the 4-element theory, that during the lifetime of the Buddha, they describe the body through the 4 elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. So you can see that it's organized in this way. The first ones are all with the earth. So you got head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bone marrow, kidneys, liver, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs. Okay, so spleen is where we stop with the earth element. These other ones are part of the earth element, but they're also helping with the wind element, which is the lungs. Then the large intestine, small intestine, this one is associated with the wind element because this is where the movement of the body, but the organ itself is associated with the earth element. Then you've got the stomach, which is associated with the fire element, even though the stomach itself is the earth element. The fire element is like the heat in the body. And then you've got the feces, which the feces itself is the earth element, but there can sometimes be water as part of that. Then you've got the brain, which is also part of the earth element. But then we go into the water, which is the bile, the phlegm, the pus, the blood, the sweat, the fat. Fat is considered to be part of the water element. Tears, the grease. This is like the oil on the skin and stuff like this. Saliva, mucus, oil of the joints, and urine. This is all the water element. So this is generally developed along those lines of the 4 elements. The earth element is the solids of the body. The fire element is associated with digestion, typically the heat of the body. Then you've got the water element, which is the liquids or the fluids of the body. Then you've got the wind element, which is the movement, like the movement of feces, the movement of the blood. The blood itself is the water element, but the movement of the blood is the wind element. So this is how they would diagnose the body, where nowadays we have much more detailed scientific ways of talking about the body with cells and molecules and things like this, that we understand the body in a lot deeper level of detail than they did during the lifetime of the Buddha. But during his lifetime, and even now, traditional medicine will diagnose the body through these 4 elements, and then they will actually offer remedies based on these 4 elements. The reason why this is helpful for you to understand these 4 elements just to a kind of marginal level of detail of earth, water, wind, and fire is because in the teachings of the Buddha, he will oftentimes refer to this when he's talking about the body. He will say the four great elements, and this is when he's referring to the body. So you'll be able to see that in Dependent Origination today, where he talks about, well, I don't have it on the slide, but if you look at it in the book, you'll see when he talks about the body, he talks about these four elements. So this will help you to understand that when he's talking about the four elements, he's talking about the body itself. Okay, so what you do is you meditate on each body part and you visualize that body part and then move to the next one. And there's 32 here. So if you spend, 30 seconds to a minute on each one, you're going to have about a 30-minute meditation as you go through these. Okay, so this is the way that you would develop the unattractiveness of the body during the lifetime of the Buddha. And sometimes they would do this in the presence of an actual corpse, because if a corpse was brought into the temple, they were going to burn it for cremation. The body being there, either just sitting there by itself, it's decaying, there's a certain smell, there would be maggots and other things that are starting to accumulate. And then as they're burning it, then there's different sounds and different smells that are coming from that as well. And this would help them to develop the unattractiveness of the physical body. Nowadays, what we do, where some people do this, but nowadays what we do is we take a picture like this, which is, partially dissected corpse where it's open, and now you just stare at it with your eyes open and you look at this. And there's different graphic images like this that you can get on the internet and be able to see these kinds of things. And this would help to develop that unattractiveness of the body. So you can go to actual imagery rather than having to visualize it yourself. So you can do these kinds of things in order to develop this unattractiveness of the body. So what I was going to do with you guys is actually do this with you if you would like, and then you'll get a chance to practice it. If you like, we can either do this one with the body, just staring at it and breathing in and breathing out and continuing to visualize this. Or if you guys would like, we can go through the 32-part body meditation. Or if you guys are like, I'm not interested in either of those things right now, we can do something else like breathing mindfulness meditation or something like that. So let me just take a little poll. How many of you guys would like to do meditation to eliminate sexual cravings? Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that means the rest of you guys aren't interested, so that's more people than that are actually interested in doing it. So for those of you guys that would like to do this one, you guys can do this one, because I'm not going to guide you in this. If you would like to do this version of it, out of those of you guys that would like to do it, would you like to do this version or you like to do this version? The first one? Number 1. Okay, so I'm going to leave this on here. And then what I'll do with the rest of you guys is I'll lead you in a breathing mindfulness meditation practice. And for those of you guys that would like to do this one, you will have this on the screen. So after we do breathing mindfulness meditation, and we're going into that, and then at some point you just open your eyes, if you haven't memorized this yet, and you look at each one individually, and then you envision it and visualize it in your mind. And then eventually we'll get to the end of the breathing mindfulness meditation where I'll chant and we'll come out of this. So everybody will be able to do what it is that they would like to do. Okay? All right. So if you guys would like to pull up a cushion, and for those of you guys online, you guys can do the same thing. You can either do the breathing mindfulness meditation, or if you would like to do the 32-part body meditation, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay? Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Rasa Bhagavato สัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุตตรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังโอโตภะคะวะติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full body. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind has moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath, or visualizing each body part. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Otang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakawa Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakatoro Kavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Okay, I'd like to see if you guys have any questions on this meditation. If there's anything you'd like to ask about this, some of you guys had an opportunity to do it. Do you guys have any questions, either here at the temple or anybody online? You have a question, Doche?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The diaphragm, can it be seen as like, I thought something about like wrapping on the organs, is it also related to the, like that kind of border between organs and the inner casing of the body?
It's what allows you to breathe as your diaphragm goes up and down. I think it inhales and exhales your lungs. We have a nurse here. She might actually know more. Leela's online, but I think that's what the diaphragm does, is that as you move the diaphragm, I think it allows you to breathe in and out. It's below the lungs. Yeah.
Okay. And with this, am I looking at each part and trying to see how it's separate from the body, and also like maybe repulsive and not like attractive?
You're not interested in being repulsed by it, because that would be favoring and opposing or having agreeable and disagreeable contact, because eventually by the time you let go of craving, desire, attachment, you don't have any repulsion in the mind. You just accept what is and you understand what is, but you're looking at the unattractiveness of it, how by having and engaging in sexual contact, you're essentially engaging in contact with all of these bits and pieces and parts. And we view it as attractive because we see the outer layer of the skin and all the other things that go with it. But when you start breaking it down and looking at the little individual pieces and parts, you may not see it attractive anymore as you're starting to develop that more and more. If you haven't ever been to like an anatomy lab or something like that, where they have the skin ripped off and you can actually see, or they don't rip it off, but they take it off, where you can see the anatomy of the body, this can be really impactful for you. They have places like this that I've gone to in America. I imagine they have them around here somewhere too, where you can go into a space where they have a dead body there and they have the skin off and you can see all the bits and pieces and parts. And this helps you to develop the unattractiveness of the body as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. The more you see the body as it truly is, you won't see it as attractive and something you're interested in having sex with. Okay, let me see. We don't have any questions on Facebook or YouTube either. So what I'm going to do is just move into the... Okay, yeah, Leela's giving the thumbs up. So she's in agreement with what I'm sharing about the diaphragm. So let's move into this talk about dependent origination, because this is going to help you understand the overall problem that you're experiencing by being in this existence. And it's going to help you understand the fetter of ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality, better as well. So this is referred to as the highest law of nature, because it's the detailed description of what's leading to your rebirth and what's leading to discontentedness. So it's 12 interlinking steps. But let's first kind of look at this and what it is, and then we'll go into actually studying it. So it's the highest law of nature that describes exactly why you're experiencing discontentedness and rebirth. It's 12 interlinking steps. These factors are dependent on one another. It's explaining how one thing leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another. And this is why one is experiencing discontentedness and why one experiences existence in the cycle of rebirth. It helps you to deeply understand the problem in detail and the solution, because that's ultimately what you're getting to by eliminating the ignorance or the unknowing of true realities. You would like to get to the solution. So dependent origination, seeing the problem very clearly through these 12 interlinking steps, it'll help you understand the solution and what you're working towards. Of course, the problem that we've talked about in the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots is because of ignorance, there's then craving and clinging. And because of craving and clinging, there's anger, right? This ignorance or this unknowing of true reality is the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. And because of that, it chases and has craving and longing, yearning, chasing after the objects of its affection. If it gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings. And if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets the painful feelings. The solutions to this, I talk about the wholesome roots as being wisdom, the generosity and loving kindness, but here I've kind of written it a little bit different way, that the solutions to this is cultivating wisdom and the elimination of craving and clinging and the elimination of anger. Okay, so I've described the 3 poisons for you in this retreat and lots of other courses and programs that I share. But anybody who hasn't studied that with me, I'll just give you a little bit of a summary, because this is going to help you to understand dependent origination. Because the way that the Buddha teaches is he teaches in layers, that you start with the 4 noble truths, and it gives you like a window into the mind. Then you go into the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, or the 3 fires, and that's a deeper level of detail, and it kind of broadens your understanding. Then you go into things like the 10 fetters and ultimately dependent origination, and this gets you down to the deepest level of detail that you can actually see what's going on in the mind, and you can independently verify these things. So if you haven't learned the 3 poisons or 3 unwholesome roots yet, let me just give you a little bit of a summary of this. What the craving, desire, attachment is, this is the mind's longing, yearning, the chasing after the objects of your affection. It's the selfish desires. It's the unquenchable thirst, where the mind thinks that there's something external that's going to provide some lasting satisfaction. So the mind chases after these things. It might chase after money, or a new car, or a house, or a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, or clothes, or jewelry. It's not just the acquiring of these things, because some of these things we actually need to actually, go forward in life, perhaps. But It's the longing, yearning. It's the thinking that this external thing is going to provide lasting satisfaction. So the mind chases after it. And now if the mind gets what it wants, it gets conditioned pleasant feelings. It gets happy, excited, elated, thrill, euphoria. But if the mind doesn't get what it wants, it gets the painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. So the problem isn't the money. That's not the problem. Or the fact that maybe somebody needs a new house or you need new transportation. It's the mind forming its feelings based on this thing. That if I have a certain amount of money in my bank account, then I'll be happy. But if that money goes down, then now the mind will be sad. This is because of craving, desire, attachment. The mind's longing, yearning, thinking that something external is going to provide lasting satisfaction. And when the mind's not getting what it wants, one of the things that can happen is this anger arises, where now the mind can become bitter and hostile and harsh towards others. There can be frustration or agitation or annoyance towards other beings. And now when the mind's perceiving these painful feelings of frustration, agitation, and others coming from something external, it thinks that this person or this situation is causing the problem. So the mind will push that away. That's aversion. Because of its lack of wisdom that it's really craving that's causing this problem, it'll tend to push this away with aversion. You'll push people away, or you'll push a situation away, or you'll become bitter and harsh and hostile towards others through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. Or you'll put your expectations on people and try to control people to do things your way. And this is because of the mind's cravings that this is actually being experienced. So now when that anger is arising, the mind is undisciplined, uncontrolled. One becomes unskillful through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. And now when you're being unskillful through your anger, you damage your relationships. So if you push people away, you can't live harmoniously with all people there. If you're being bitter and harsh and hostile towards people, you can't live harmoniously with all beings. They might choose to leave out of your life because they're not interested in being around that. Or if you put your expectations on people, trying to control people to get your cravings fulfilled, now that people feel pressured to do things your way, and they might choose to leave out of your life because of that. So in all of this situation, the individual can't live harmoniously with all beings. This is one of the reasons why you experience broken relationships over and over and over again, because the mind is misunderstanding what the problem is. And that's where the third poison or the third unwholesome root or this fire comes in, is that the mind has this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, this lack of wisdom, misunderstanding, misperception, or confusion of what the real problem is. The mind, with its lack of wisdom, thinks the problem's external. So that's why it's pushing away, being bitter, harsh, and hostile, or putting expectations on people, because the mind's trying to get its cravings fulfilled. The mind wants things to be a certain way. And with this person in your life, you feel like, I can't get what I want, so I'm going to push this person away, or I'm going to push this situation away. Or the mind thinks, I'm going to be bitter and harsh and hostile, I'm going to fear this person into doing things my way. Or I'm going to put my expectations on this person and try to control them, and then I'll get things done my way. And now the mind thinks, I got what I wanted. But none of that stuff is permanent. You can't get what you want permanently because you live in an impermanent world. And there's 8 billion people in the world, and they're just not going to do things your way. So as long as you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, in some situations you're going to get those things, in other situations you're not. And as long as you lack wisdom, the craving and anger will continue to exist in the mind. So we say that craving, anger, and ignorance is how we describe it, but it's really because of ignorance that craving and anger continues to exist. And you'll see this in dependent origination when we talk about that. Then this is dependent origination in kind of like a summary form, that you need to understand this kind of introduction to dependent origination before we go into the detailed version of it. There's kind of two versions of it. This is kind of like helping you see cause and effect. So I'm going to introduce you to this simplified version of dependent origination before we go into the detailed version, because this will help you to understand the detailed version. So essentially what the Buddha is sharing here is that when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. He's showing this causality between the two things. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that ceases. Okay, so he's showing this causality, how one thing leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another. Okay, so because you went to school and learned English, you can now talk to people. And when you talk to people, you make friends. And when you make friends, when you have a problem, you have somebody to talk to. And when you talk to somebody, you get help for what it is that you need, right? Or you went to school to learn computers, and because you learned computers, you can now get a job. And when you get a job, you get a paycheck. And when you get a paycheck, you can go outside and buy food. And when you have food, you can live your life. Right? This is the causality of showing how one thing leads to another, leads to another. Or if you don't learn English, you can't talk to people. And when you can't talk to people, you're not going to have friends. And when you don't have friends, you're not going to be able to solve your problems and resolve your issues. Or if you don't go to school and learn some skill and ability, you can't get a job. And when you can't get a job, you're not going to be able to earn a paycheck. And when you don't earn a paycheck, you're not going to have food to be able to eat. And therefore, when you don't have food to eat, this being will die. Right? So this is showing when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. And then the other part that I was sharing is when this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that ceases. Okay, so the Buddha is showing this, how one thing leads to another that leads to another. Okay, and he's showing this cause and effect, or this action and result, the results of your decision, this causality or the natural law of karma. Okay, so now we're going to go into the detailed version of this. Okay, this is dependent origination in detail, where he's showing you the 12 interlinking steps of what's leading to rebirth and what's leading to your discontentedness. The Four Noble Truths penetrates right into the heart of it, but this is going to show you all the 12 interlinking steps. So what he's saying here is, with ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality, when your mind lacks wisdom, then there's going to be volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. And those choices and decisions are going to be based in this ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality. When you're making decisions that are unwise, that means there's still pollutions in the mind, and now that's going to lead to a consciousness. There's going to be a forming of a consciousness. And now with the forming of that consciousness, it's going to need to find what's called a name and form. What name and form is essentially the physical body. I'm going to show you more detail of what this is, but it's essentially the physical body. So the mind is going to need to find a physical body, right? So it now comes into the womb. Now with that physical body and the mind together, it's going to form the 6 sense bases inside the womb. This is the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. There's these 6 sense bases that mature and develop inside the womb. Then there's going to be contact through those 6 sense bases, where the mind is experiencing contact coming through the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. There's going to be some form of contact. Then once there's contact, there's going to be certain feelings that are developed based on that contact. There's either going to be pleasant feelings or painful feelings. And then because of the feelings, then there's going to be craving. This is the longing, the yearning, the chasing after the objects of your affection. Then there's going to be something called clinging. Clinging is where you're holding on to something, wanting it to be permanent. Then with the clinging, there's going to be existence, where this being is in existence now. Then when there's existence, there's going to be birth, coming out into the world and being birthed. Whenever there's birth, there's going to be aging and death. This is the impermanent nature of the body, that there's going to be aging and death. And then because of these things, now there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is the discontentedness, right? This is how the whole mass of discontentedness comes to be. So the number one problem that each individual human being is experiencing is right here, ignorance. Because if it wasn't for ignorance, none of the rest of this would actually exist. So if you can eliminate ignorance, then you can dismantle this entire thing, this entire chain of events that is occurring. You can completely dismantle it. So what you've learned so far is you've learned because of ignorance, there's craving in the mind. And when there's craving, then it leads to anger, which is the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots. The Four Noble Truths penetrates right here. It comes right into here and explains to you feelings, craving, and clinging. right? It just kind of explains these three to you and gives you this little window into the mind. The three poisons or three unwholesome roots says, oh, there's this bigger problem. It's not just craving. This leads to anger, and then it's all because of ignorance. But now he's showing you the interlinking steps of exactly how this comes to be. So again, I'll go through this again. Because of ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, the mind's lack of wisdom, its misunderstandings, its confusion, it experiences making decisions through that lack of wisdom. And now those decisions are going to produce unwholesome results. It's going to produce unwholesome karma because you're making decisions through a lack of wisdom, through misunderstanding. And one of those unwholesome results is that the mind is continuing to maintain its pollutions. And now with these pollutions in mind, it's going to continue to experience this consciousness that as long as there's craving and clinging in the mind, these pollutions, it's going to lead to a new consciousness. And now when there's a new consciousness, that mind needs to now find a name and form or a physical body. When it's found a physical body, that mind and physical body start to mature and develop. And now there's these 6 sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body itself. Okay, in the mind itself. Then those 6 sense bases start experiencing contact through those 6 sense bases. And now the mind forms feelings, pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Then there's craving, where the mind is longing, yearning. It wants those pleasant feelings. It wants those things. And now when it gets those, it clings to these pleasant feelings, wanting them to be permanent. Then there's an existence where now there is a being in existence. And this is where some people use the word becoming, right? That now this being has become, it's become a being. And there's an existence in the womb. Now, once there's an existence, now it's birthed into the world. This being comes into the world. And then having come into the world, there's aging and death. That's the impermanent nature of the body. Then there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. That happens right from the beginning. As soon as we come out of our mom's stomach, we cry and cry and cry because we're craving that permanence. Everything was perfect inside the stomach, right? Inside the womb. We had food. We had, this place where we were comfortable. We had come into this womb. It's like, hey, we've got this space all to ourselves. There's nobody around. We just sit here and hang out. We get all this food. We don't have to lift a finger, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, this impermanence happens. So the mind's craving that permanence. It's clinging to that experience inside the womb. So now when we get that first big bout of impermanence where we come out into the world, now we cry because we're experiencing this sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair because of the birth, right? Because of birth, it's now led to this, right? And that's how this whole mass of discontentedness is experienced. Okay, so this is dependent origination. You may not understand it the first time you learn it, right? You're going to need to sit with this and understand each individual aspect. You're going to ultimately need to memorize this and be able to understand it because this is what you're dismantling, and you're going to be able to see exactly what's causing your discontentedness. Some ways that you might decide to look at it is almost like a mathematical equation that because of ignorance and craving and clinging, right? Ignorance plus craving and clinging equals discontentedness. You can kind of like draw a line right here, make it like a mathematical equation that when you add up ignorance and craving and clinging, it's going to equal discontentedness. Some people look at it that way as a mathematical expression. Okay, so now let me show you guys what name and form is. This is, the Buddha actually describes in this teaching. If you go to volume 5, chapter 14, the Buddha explains each individual factor of dependent origination. And you can learn about what each individual factor is. I've just kind of explained it to you a little bit here, but you can see it in his own words. But here I've put in name and form because this isn't one that people typically understand from the beginning. Here he's describing essentially 4 of the 5 aggregates. This is what name is. Feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. That's the 4 of the 5 aggregates. And then contact is just a 5th thing that's making up name. That's what he calls name, is these 5 things. This is called name. Then those 4 great elements that I mentioned to you, earth, water, wind, and fire, that's what's making up the form. that's the physical form. So when you understand that the Buddha refers to the body as the four great elements, then you understand the form that he's talking about is the body, right? And this also helps you to understand desire for form, because sometimes people don't understand that, right? So here you can see what name and form is. The way to think about this is just think about it as the physical body. So when we go back here, when you see the consciousness or the mind comes in together with the physical body, that's what he's talking about here. He's just describing it in a whole lot of detail so you can see the intricacy of the teaching. Okay, so these are the 12 interlinking steps that's leading to discontentedness. So the way you get rid of discontentedness, because it's at the very end of these 12 interlinking steps, is you back all the way up to the beginning. What started this chain of events? What was the first domino to fall? Well, it was ignorance. So if you can transform ignorance, then you can dismantle this entire thing. You can eliminate your discontentedness, and you can eliminate the continuous rebirth. So that's why the very first thing that I usually teach students when they first start learning with me is don't believe anything I say. Because belief, you can't dismantle this through belief. It's not possible. Because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You need to get to wisdom. That's the antidote of ignorance, is getting to wisdom. So by you learning, reflecting, independently verifying practice, then you can dismantle this. So while I don't teach this when you first start, because it's a deeper, higher teaching, I set you up so that all the way along your path, all along your journey, you're working towards eliminating this by cultivating wisdom. Right? So this is the benefit of being led by a teacher that understands this, is that you're being taught from the very beginning, don't believe anything, cultivate wisdom. This is why you need to cultivate the wisdom, because if you can get to wisdom here, then you'll make decisions through wisdom. And now your decisions will not lead to a consciousness, because your mind will be fully transformed. You'll eliminate all the pollutions and eradicate all the fetters from the mind. And when you eradicate all the fetters from the mind, there isn't going to be a new consciousness. So that means that because there's no new consciousness, it's not going to need to find a name and form. And because it's not finding a name and form, there won't be any six sense bases. There won't be contact. There won't be feelings. You will have eliminated craving and clinging. There won't be an existence. There won't be birth. Therefore, there's no aging and death, and there won't be sorrow, grief, pain, and displeasure and despair. So as you're eliminating more and more of your ignorance, because of this chain of events, you're going to see more and more peacefulness. You're not going to end up here. You're not going to end up in the discontentedness, because you're cultivating more and more wisdom here. You're training your mind. You're eradicating more and more of the craving and clinging, which is going to eradicate more and more of the discontentedness. Okay, do you guys have questions on this? You have a question? Okay.
I would like to understand ignorance more.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds for me sometimes like ignore something. Sounds a bit like the word sounds for me a bit like the opposite of mindful and concentration, not being conscious about the world around us. Is it that, or?
It is those things, but not exactly. It's more of the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom, the misunderstanding, the confusion. So, for example, something that the mind's confused about from the very beginning is that it thinks other people are causing you to be angry or frustrated. So because the mind is ignorant or has this lack of wisdom, thinking that mom or dad or brothers or sisters are causing you to be angry, that's why the mind pushes people away, is bitter, harsh, and hostile, and it puts its expectations on people, because it falsely thinks, it has this misperception that something external is causing those inner feelings. And because of that lack of wisdom, the mind stays stuck in this continuous cycle, because it can never eliminate its craving and clinging, because it doesn't realize that's the issue. It thinks that the problem's external. So it goes around life constantly trying to tell other people what they should or shouldn't be doing. That's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You should do it this way. You are making me angry. You are frustrating me. This is the lack of wisdom that the mind has. It's the misunderstanding and confusion. And because of that, it just stays stuck in this continuous cycle. So out of all the fetters, ultimately when we talk about ignorance, it's like the fetter of all fetters, that because of ignorance, the individual just stays stuck. And that's why you got to start with the Four Noble Truths. You got to be able to penetrate and experience the establishment of right view, so you can see very clearly that it's craving and clinging that's causing the problem. Because as long as the mind goes around believing that it's something external, then the mind can't ever dismantle this, because it's looking in the wrong place. It's not seeing the real cause of the problem. So that's why you need to really deeply establish right view, where you see that craving and clinging is the problem.
Okay, so this addresses what you said. Ignorance addresses that.
Ignorance describes that the mind is ignorant of the cycle of rebirth. It's ignorant of the natural law of karma. It's ignorant of the Four Noble Truths. It's ignorant of the 5 precepts, the Eightfold Path. It doesn't understand the wisdom of how to get liberated from these feelings. And that's what a Buddha is doing, is a Buddha is figuring this out on their own, developing this wisdom. And now once they practice it for themselves, they see it work to liberate their own mind. Now they're like, okay, here it is. Here's how to actually do it. And that's why an individual can't figure it out by themselves, because they don't have the capacity of mind to be able to accumulate wisdom over multiple lifetimes in the same way that a Buddha does, so that now a Buddha can say, here's the wisdom of what it takes to liberate the mind.
And is it also, you could put into that, that someone is closing their eyes a bit to see the truth, like they are not really looking? Is it that also involved in that? Yeah,
because of the mind's pollutions, like sensual desire, for example, the mind will long and yearn and chase after these pleasant things, and it thinks that, hey, that's the way to live life. Let me go get some more money. Let me go get a new boyfriend or girlfriend. Let me get some sex. Let me get this food. Let me get these substances that cause heedlessness. Let me do this gambling. Let me do this shopping. The mind's sensual desire, it just keeps chasing and chasing, trying to get pleasure through the senses. And in some cases, the mind gets what it wants, so it gets those pleasant feelings, and it's like, this was worthwhile, thank goodness. But then when it experiences the painful feelings due to its ignorance, it thinks that the problem is external. And now it just stays stuck, and it keeps chasing and chasing and chasing. And now there can be ego in the mind, right? We could go through every single fetter. It's because of every single fetter. But now with ego in the mind, the arrogance, the pride, the mind thinks that, everybody else is the problem. I'm not the problem. It's everyone else that's the problem. But yet it keeps chasing after all these things. And this is just because of its ignorance. It's stuck in this delusion or this confusion or this misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you, David. Maybe you could help me with some reflection on this. Like I was thinking about like ignorance causing first, like I was kind of thinking like looking at the whole process and thinking that like volition can also start with like just the volition before volitional formations, like will, like wanting to maybe, again, coming back to becoming or existing. Like there's like ignorance causing this volitional will within me or a being to like want to be born, and then that causes volitional formations. Is that accurate somewhat, or does it go into? Yeah.
So volitional formations are your choices and decisions, that you're making certain choices and decisions, but with a mind full of ignorance or unknowing of true reality, not only does it have that, but it has craving and it has anger too, right? Those, going back to the 3 poisons, it has all of those, and now the individual makes decisions through these. So the mind is now making decisions through its own selfish desires and things that it wants to be pleased all the time and permanently, and now it makes decisions through this anger and hatred and ill will and frustration, agitation, annoyance, and now the mind making decisions in the world through that ignorance, which has embedded in it the craving and the anger as well. Now those unwise decisions are leading to the unwholesome results or the unwholesome karma, and it's all coming from the ignorance. That's the number one thing. So the decisions are based in that ignorance, but it's laced with craving and anger as well. Because if there's ignorance, there's going to typically be craving and anger in the mind as well. And now those decisions, if you remember back to the natural law of karma, if you've been in any of those classes with me, anytime you're making decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance, it's always going to produce unwholesome results. So here, decisions being based in ignorance, it's always going to lead to unwholesome results, unwholesome karma.
Thank you.
And more, as you're developing wisdom here, more and more you're making decisions through that wisdom. And that's what's going to dismantle all of this. So that's why you need to really slow the mind down, make wise decisions each individual moment, so that now you're getting more and more of that craving, anger, and ignorance out of your mind, making wiser and wiser choices through generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. And that's what's going to lead to the extinguishing of all unwholesome karma. And now you'll just only experience wholesome karma in the world more and more and more.
Yeah, so, okay. And I was kind of mainly just dissecting, like trying to think about these dissected further. So for volitional formations, is there like an initial like willing in the mind, like in a way just volition before volitional formations? Like,
yeah, there needs to be intention behind the decision. So like, that's why if you just walk down the street and a cockroach ran under your foot and you stepped on it and killed it, there's no unwholesome karma there, because there's no craving, there's no anger, and there's no ignorance. Instead, there was no intention behind the decision. Your decision that you were making was to just walk down the street. And now, unbeknownst to you, this cockroach ran under your foot and squash. Whereas if you were intentionally walking down the street looking for cockroaches and stomping on them, there's a certain craving there, there's an anger there, that ill will, and now it's coming from your ignorance. And now this is going to produce unwholesome results in your life, because you're now making decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance. So there needs to always be intention in order for there to be the creation of karma. That intention needs to be there.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had one more, if I can get back to. Does, like, again, maybe you can help me with my reflection. So it's like, I was looking at name and form and thinking like, can we get into things like concept before name and form? Like in my mind, I was thinking, okay, before, like as we lead into six sense bases as a condition, sense contact, but before that, like we have consciousness, and then does that consciousness create like a concept, and then name and form arise? Like, do you get kind of where I'm leading into this dissection maybe?
The consciousness comes from the volitional formations, the decisions that we made in our previous life to not eliminate our pollutions. Ignorance stayed in the mind, so therefore those decisions that we made to not get to enlightenment led to this new consciousness. And now once a consciousness is formed, it's going to need to find a name and form. And that's why we're here in existence, because this consciousness came together with the body. And now there's this existence that is essentially now going to form the six sense bases, the contact, and all these other things. That if it wasn't for the lack of wisdom, we would have made decisions wisely that would have purified our mind, and we wouldn't have led to a new consciousness. But because we didn't make those decisions, that's where the consciousness was created. Because if there's ever craving, desire, attachment in the mind, that's the fuel that leads to the next rebirth. So the Buddha is showing you the sequence of things that is occurring, but I'm going to show you something here in a moment to show you that all these things are essentially occurring at the same time. One thing is leading to another, but for example, if there's ignorance in the mind, that means there's craving and there's clinging as well, and there's discontentedness. So now with that ignorance in the mind, at the time of death, that craving is the fuel, that is the spark that creates the consciousness. And the reason why that consciousness is coming about is because of our decision making, that we lacked the wisdom to make the wise decision to train the mind and eradicate the pollutions out of the mind.
Sorry, one more question if that's good.
You ask as many as you like. We've got some online too.
In other practice and in meditation, my question is around consciousness. I have been practicing before seeing consciousness related to each sense door having its own consciousness in meditation, like the eye has its own eye consciousness and feeling consciousness. And in practice, is this something the Buddha taught, or is it helpful to see it in this way, or is it okay to just see consciousness as one conglomerate? Or because in practice, I was looking at seeing them arising and passing away. Like eye consciousness comes into being, goes away. To me, I never saw it as static after practicing. Like I see it as coming and going. Like even eye consciousness is only there when sense contact is there, and then it goes away. Is this valid or?
So when we talk about consciousness, you can think about it as just the mind, like a cardboard box. But then there's that mind becoming aware of contact through each of the sense bases. So there's the sense base, which we call the internal sense base, which is the eye. Then there's the external sense base, which in this case is the form. Then there's the contact between the two. Now the mind becomes aware of it. That's called eye consciousness. But it is all happening within the mind itself. There's only one consciousness, but the mind is now aware of that physical form. And that's how we describe contact, that there's the internal sense base, the external sense base, there's the awareness of it within the mind, which the Buddha refers to as eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. And now we call that contact. That there's now been contact. So when you look at each one of these in volume 5, chapter 14, when he describes contact, you'll see him describe it in this way, that there's got to be 3 things in order for contact to exist. There needs to be an internal sense base, an external sense base, and there needs to be awareness of it or consciousness of it. And now we call that contact.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
Could I clarify that the contact, or maybe even all the way back to the 6 sense bases? Let's say you've been using examples that are positive, and in other cases you've used examples that were negative. So let's say I smell sewage. There's a negative response, and that's the contact. The feeling, rather than craving, is repulsion or revulsion. This fits into the same way as the positive side, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So because of this, we'll jump down here now. Because of the 6 sense bases, they're going to experience contact. And when there's contact, there's going to be some feeling that is arising.
Yes.
Either pleasurable, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. And that is happening because of this craving. This craving, the mind is longing, yearning, wanting things to be a certain way. It's viewing things as agreeable or disagreeable. And that's where these conditioned feelings are occurring. And now when you experience those pleasant feelings because of your cravings, that's where the mind now clings. And it wants this pleasurable feeling to be permanent. And then it leads to existence, it leads to birth, aging, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So that is all coming from the craving and clinging, that the mind is forming these feelings.
That's a positive example.
Sure. So now let's just say, so this is sharing how you come into existence, right? And how you ultimately end up with these discontent feelings. But it's because the mind is having this craving and clinging that now when it experiences contact through the nose and it smells that particular odor that it finds to be repulsive, like the sewer, it's now going to form the painful feelings of anger, sadness, or frustration, or being annoyed, or what have you. That's what causing it is this craving and clinging. But the only reason why this craving and clinging is here is because of the ignorance. If it wasn't for the ignorance of the mind, it would have eradicated the craving and clinging. So now it's making the decision of, I'm repulsed by this and I need to push this away. So this is showing you how a being is coming into existence and how it keeps experiencing discontentedness over and over. But I have this other chart that I'll show you. This is essentially breaking down dependent origination, where the past causes in our past life with ignorance and volitional formations, because of those two things existing in the past life, there are certain present effects where there is now a consciousness, there's now a physical body, there's now these six sense bases, we're experiencing contact and feelings. And this is all in the unenlightened state. By the time you get to enlightenment, this has been dismantled. Then in the present moment, the mind is craving, clinging, and experiencing existence. And if it continues to do those things, then there's going to be birth and aging and death in the future. Okay, so this is another way to kind of break down dependent origination and look at it in this way. But then also all these 12 interlinking steps, they're also happening within the same existence as well. So right now, if you're unenlightened, you have ignorance. Right now, you are making volitional formations or choices and decisions through these. Right now, there is a consciousness in existence. Right now, there is physical form. Right now, there are the six sense bases. You are experiencing contact. You are experiencing feelings. There is craving and clinging in the mind. There is this existence. You have been born, and now you're experiencing aging and death, which is leading to this discontentedness. So we can break it down in both of these ways and analyze it in both ways, right? And what you're doing is you're looking to dismantle this, because otherwise you're going to experience the same thing over again in the future because of this ignorance. This ignorance is what's keeping everything in place. And that's why it's called dependent origination, that you are originating dependent on ignorance. And that's why you're guided to eliminate this ignorance and cultivate wisdom. Because as long as that ignorance is in place, you'll keep making the same unwise decisions over and over and over again. And it's going to keep leading to the same result, which is aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. You're just going to keep coming back into the world over and over and over again and keep experiencing this over and over again. And then as you're getting more and more wisdom in this life, so over here, as you're getting more and more wisdom in this life, your decisions are going to be improving. Your consciousness is going to be improving. You're going to notice the condition of the mind improve. You're going to even notice physical changes to the body. You're going to start noticing complexion changes about your skin and your eyes and your nails and things like this. You're going to notice that when you're having contact through the six sense bases, that you're not experiencing conditioned feelings anymore, because there is no craving, there is no clinging. You will have completely dismantled this, and you'll see that there's no discontentedness, and you'll know, aha, there's not going to be any more birth because I've completely dismantled this. You'll know that because you won't be experiencing any of the discontentedness anymore. Mm-hmm. Roxanne, I see you guys online. Thank you guys for being patient. I'm going to answer all these here first.
I was just wondering with volitional formations, we make choices and decisions about 1 million times a day, right? I mean, we dress ourselves, we groom, we take care of necessities, whether it be shopping, eating, dressing, bathing, whatever. So those like things that we need to take care of on a daily basis, safety, whatever, wellness. How do those things differ from the volitional formations that lead to ignorance or are part of that ignorant chain?
Sure. So now when you're arising wisdom, and I just see you're wearing those nice earrings, so I'm going to use that as an example of one of the decisions you've made today, okay? So as part of our decision making, with a lack of wisdom, you reach for your earrings and they're not where you thought they were. And now, because of the mind's craving, you become discontent and annoyed and frustrated, and you're looking all over the place feverishly for these earrings. And now, because of your personal existence view, you think, oh my goodness, I can't go outside without my earrings. Oh, I'm not going to look the way I want to look. And now the mind is uncomfortable to go outside, right? So this is because of the lack of wisdom, the ignorance. These volitional formations are leading to these unwholesome results of the discontentedness in your mind. But with wisdom, when you reach for your earrings, you're like, they're not there. Well, they're definitely impermanent, just like we knew. They're around here somewhere. Let me take my time and calmly look. And let me look. I can't find them. No big deal. You know what? I don't need to wear earrings today. I'm just going to go out into the world without them. And that's going to be completely fine. And now you go out into the world and you can maintain your calmness and composure, because now you're making decisions through wisdom, because you understand the universal truth of impermanence. You don't have a craving for a certain appearance and looking in the world a certain way. So this is where you can see it's not about whether you wear the earrings or not. It's about how the mind is relating to this thing. Do you see that? Yeah. So in the unenlightened state, you'll make decisions through ignorance, which is embedded with craving. And then because of that, there'll be frustration, agitation, annoyance. All this discontentedness will come to be. But with wisdom, when you're making decisions, you'll be able to make decisions that you navigate these natural laws, and you can maintain your calmness and composure because you have the wisdom of these natural laws. Of course, the earrings aren't here, because of impermanence. And you know what? I really don't need them anyway. I can just go out in the world without them. And now I'll look for them when I get home, because based on the time, I need to get to the temple and I need to have class. And I'm not going to spend the next hour looking for these earrings when I can just go outside without them. Right. And so this is the different decisions that we make when our mind is awake and has this wisdom. That's what we mean when we say awaken to enlightenment. You're gaining wisdom. So now you can navigate the world in a better way, more peacefully, more calmly, more joyfully. Okay, so I'm just going to take you guys one at a time here. I see Helena, your hand was up first, so go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. And David, the mind is really lost here. I just can't see the logical things between some things. So with volitional formations comes consciousness. Consciousness is a consequence of volitional formations. So there is no consciousness, then who makes those choices?
So what this is showing is just the sequence of events that leads to a particular rebirth. So the question that you're asking, it's actually better to see it in this example, that because of ignorance and volitional formations in a past life, where you had a consciousness in a past life, you already had one. Now, because of the ignorance and the volitional formations in that past life, now it led to a consciousness in this existence that you're now experiencing. Does that make sense?
Okay. More sense than before. Yes. Would you please come back to that previous slide?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. And when he says with ignorance as condition, choices, decisions come to be, he doesn't really mean choices and decisions per se. He means unwise, unwholesome choices and decisions, right?
Well, here we're referring to it as choices and decisions because they're leading from this ignorance, that there's certain volitional formations, but I'm adding in the unwise ones. I'm saying unwise so that you can understand how that's leading now to all of this chain of events. So there are choices and decisions in which your understanding is that it's coming from the ignorance. So to be able to help you guys see this connection, that's why I'm saying the unwise decisions. But a volitional formation is a choice or decision. And you should just think of a volitional formation as a choice and decision, because you're going to see other teachings where he's talking about volitional formations, and it doesn't necessarily mean an unwise choice. But I'm adding the unwise part to help you see this connection here.
Okay, because when there is no ignorance, when there is wisdom, there are still choices and decisions being made. It's just that they are wise.
Exactly. So an
Okay.
enlightened being is still making volitional formations. They're still having choices and decisions, but now they're based in wisdom. And that's why this whole thing is dismantled by the time you get to enlightenment, because there's no more ignorance.
Okay, thank you. And the last thing, he's talking here about form. So it means that dependent origination is only about the animal kingdom and the human kingdom, right?
Yes, here, dependent origination, he's describing what we're experiencing in the human realm, because we're human, and this is where we're learning this, and this is what we're working to dismantle. So an individual that is in the formless realm, we wouldn't think that they would be experiencing name and form. They don't have those things. They also don't have the six sense bases, but they are having these other things like consciousness and so forth, and feelings and stuff like this. But this dependent origination is something that we're experiencing in the form realms, the animal realm and the human realm.
Yay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, looks like Leela has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, David. My question is kind of a two-part question. Since our consciousness or the conditions for rebirth must find a new physical form every time, when we talk about past life memories or recognition in other people, like that used to be my mother or brother or sister, are we recognizing memory that resides in the consciousness?
Yes. So the way that I describe this is you can think about each consciousness in each individual life as a brand new, unique consciousness. And there's individual boxes, box A, box B, box C, box D. And each one of these boxes represents the mind. And each one of these boxes are different shape, different color, different texture, different size. But there are certain contents in this box. And at the end of each life, this box or this mind dissolves, but the contents are still there. So the contents need to find a new box, and that's where they now enter and they create this new mind, and now they're in this new box. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you've cleared out all the contents. There's no more contents. So that's why there isn't another box, because those contents are gone. So what's moving from life to life or consciousness to consciousness is the cravings and any residual memories. So what the mind is remembering is from the contents from your previous life have been brought into the consciousness that you now have. And now the mind is remembering those things from your previous life.
So identifying with that consciousness in any way is just more craving, desire, and attachment. And that's why, even though it carried over and we can remember things from the previous box, we still don't identify with it, because it would make it harder to let go, because it's really just craving, desire, and attachment itself in the box. So we don't identify with it.
Exactly. None of that stuff is you, because if you start having these residual memories, for example, from a past life, and you start identifying with that as who you are as a being, now the mind's just clinging to that personal existence view. And now this is where someone might experience multiple personalities. Right? We think about this as a mental disorder, but really what it is the individual is having residual memories from their past life, and they're now identifying with that being as who they are in their present life, when in reality, that's not who they are, that none of these things define who we are. So any of those residual memories or those cravings, or even the mind itself or the body itself, it's important to realize all these things are impermanent and not to cling to it as who you are.
You. And I just had one more kind of question, an idea. I wanted to see if I'm looking at it the right way. One of the things I really had to let go of was this idea that there is a collective consciousness that I'm a part of, and that it's built on love. And now kind of realizing, oh, there is no collective consciousness, and consciousness is actually not love. It is all of these other things, all of these other attachments and cravings. That's kind of a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, you're going to need to let go of that because that's part of that ignorance or unknowing of true reality and delusion. If we thought we were part of this collective consciousness, then we wouldn't ever be able to get to enlightenment because we can't affect other people's consciousness. You need to be able to see that there's individual consciousness, and each one of those individual consciousness are polluted, and your role is to work on this consciousness that you've got right now, this mind that you've got right now. And that mind doesn't define who you are, and everything in it is impermanent, and even the mind itself. So continuing to hold on to this idea that we're part of this collective consciousness would be to hold on to the ignorance or the delusion or the misunderstanding.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add to that, anytime you run across something like that, where somebody's saying those kinds of things, you would like to have tangible, independently verifiable proof that this thing is true. So if somebody's saying, oh, there's this collective consciousness that we're all part of, okay, how do I independently verify that? And if there's no way to independently verify it, then it's not true. But you can independently verify that there's one consciousness here that you're currently interacting with and that you currently possess, that you can see that and you have that tangible, independently verifiable proof, but you don't have any independently verifiable proof that there's any kind of collective consciousness or any number of other things that people teach. You would always like to get to wisdom because that's what's going to allow you to dismantle this and be able to see true reality of what's actually existing in the world. And then you can purge the mind of all these beliefs. And then what you're putting in place instead is the wisdom that you've independently verified, and you know the truth with 100% certainty. And the more that your mind becomes peaceful and joyful, meaning you've cleared out the discontentedness that's down here as part of this, the more you've cleaned this out, that's where you'll know you're getting more and more wise. So when you go 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, for example, with no discontentedness whatsoever, you know that you've completely eradicated ignorance, which is what we'll talk about here in a moment. And that's where you'll know the truth. And you'll know with 100% certainty, you'll have an unshakable, unsteady, or completely steady mind where it's unshakable, it's completely steady and stable. And now you'll know that whatever wisdom you've acquired to get to that mental state, that is true reality. That as long as the mind is experiencing any kind of discontentedness, it still doesn't know the truth yet. And we refer to this as final knowledge. So when somebody's completely eradicated ignorance and they've dismantled this entire dependent origination, the Buddha refers to this as final knowledge, that now you have the truth, that you fully understand how to eradicate and dismantle this because you're no longer experiencing discontentedness. So that's where you have independent verification of these teachings leading to enlightenment, because your mind's no longer experiencing discontentedness, and you'll know the truth from that point forward. But to be able to get to that point, you've got to independently verify each one of these little tiny things. In certain situations, yeah, it's going to be a challenge to let go of this concept of a collective consciousness that maybe the mind's been holding on to for a period of time and thinking about it in a certain way. And then what's going to help you to be able to do that is the breathing mindfulness meditation, the generosity, training the mind to let go, but then actively being able to discover the truth through independent verification. Okay, I still see hands up. I don't know if you guys have additional questions. I'll go ahead and just click the button here and see if, Leela, do you have additional questions or something you'd like to ask?
No, I forgot to put my hand down. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. How about you, Helena? Do you have some more?
Yes, Teacher David, I think it clicked. This teaching is not about how consciousness first originated, but it's about rebirth, right?
Yeah, it's not about how it first came to be. It's about how a being keeps coming back into the world over and over and over again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Are there some scientific researches today about cycle of rebirth? Or because in the West, I think nobody, or because of impermanence, but many people don't think about rebirth, heard about it. So
I suspect there's probably somewhere someone that's researching this, or a group of people, but I'm just not aware of it. But I suspect there probably is somewhere. Yeah, but you can independently verify this through volume 11, chapter 105. Not only do I mention this as one of the 17 things you can use to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, but there's 17 things there that you can use to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. So you don't need a scientist to tell you something, because even in that situation, you're still believing them, right? Because they've gone off and done the research and they've written a report, and now you're reading their report, and still you're just believing it, right? So this is why whenever you see things, you're not interested in believing it. So you would like to independently verify these things for yourself. And this is just one of many things that you can do to verify the cycle of rebirth.
David, I've heard in the past that we we're birthed unfettered. And earlier in the retreat, we talked about a stream enterer who would be free from personal existence view, doubt, wrong, and observances. And a once reformer then would be free of some other fetters. So in the chain of events here, we get to birth as the second last one. So is it fair to say that some people arrive free from certain fetters and some people arrive free from even more?
Okay.
And some people are a bit like me, totally confused.
So here's the fetters. When you're born, you have some personal existence view. You know, you have doubt because you're brand new. You don't even know what the teachings are. You have wrong behavior. You probably aren't doing any rites or rituals at that time, but somewhere along the line you learn those things and you acquire that through your conditioning and through your experiences. You have sensual desire from birth, but you don't have ill will from birth. This is accumulated through life. Like, we don't go into the nursery at the hospital hating other babies. This is acquired because of our sensual desire. We have cravings, and in some cases we get what we want, in some cases we don't. And then we start attributing those painful feelings to something external. So now we don't like mom. Mom won't give me that chocolate. She's a bad person. Now we start having ill will towards her based on our ignorance, that it's all driven from this central desire. But we're not born, nobody's born with ill will in the mind. Then this desire for form and formless, this, is in the mind because of its cravings and wanting to come into this world. We're clinging from the very beginning. We don't typically have conceit from the very beginning. This is acquired over time through our experiences. We do have restlessness, from birth, because we still have cravings in our mind, and we do have ignorance in our mind. But ultimately, by the time somebody's, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, all these fetters are essentially starting to be developed and in place. But this is also why a child starting to learn at, say, age 6, which is when I started teaching my son, they have much less of these pollutions. As we age, we accumulate a lot more of them. Through our direct experiences, we get a lot more ill will. We get a lot more conceit. So the earlier in life that you start practicing, the better. And that doesn't mean that you couldn't get to enlightenment if you're older, and it doesn't mean you couldn't eliminate some of these fetters without having ever even seen the teachings, because there's some people who actually start working on eliminating these fetters without even realizing that's what they're doing. Because if you think about the aging process, one of the first things that we start experiencing is the elimination of personal existence view. As we age, we start caring less and less about how other people perceive our image, or things like this, that we don't necessarily pay attention to those things. It's not everybody, it's just some people, right? There's some people who are 90 years old dressing up to the nines, dressing up amazingly and worried about every last little thing of how they look and appear to others. But generally, natural death and natural life leads towards the elimination of these fetters to a certain degree. But we're not born with all of them. We accumulate some of them as we're going. And the older we are, we tend to accumulate more of these. But you can have people that kind of eliminate some of them without even realizing that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go back to dependent origination. Okay, Doche, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm asking like the bigger question, or kind of like the the one that it all leads me to. In like someone who has obtained like path knowledge or final knowledge or arhat or liberated person, they break this chain by removing ignorance completely, and then the chain is broken and cannot be conditioned further. So then I guess you were saying the Buddha mentions that there is no more house to be built, like no more body built, no more cycle of rebirth. Then there is nothing conditioned. There's there's the teachings. Does it hint about or talk about like an unconditioned state, like nibbana? You hear nibbana, or this abiding in peace. Like, is there? Do we think there may be an awareness that's there left that's still abiding, or is it completely left untaught, like untaught? And does that relate to any conditions, a condition of peace that could be experienced in the same life, or is kind of where my mind is thinking?
Okay, I'll try to answer what I think you're asking, but if I don't answer, just feel free to ask follow-ups, okay? So by the time you eradicate the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality and you fully cultivate wisdom, at that point the mind's fully purified. There are no more fetters in the mind. It's completely unconditioned at that point. These 10 fetters are the conditions that are leading to discontentedness. But having fully arisen wisdom, you've learned how to now purify the mind. And now the mind's completely purified of all these pollutions. And it will never become polluted again, because the mind has completely dismantled this dependent origination, that there's full wisdom in the mind. So now there's only wise decisions being made, and it won't lead to a consciousness, and so forth and so on. And you'll be able to see that, because if you think about this as that mathematical equation that I mentioned to you, that ignorance plus craving leads to discontentedness. Well, if there is no ignorance and there is no craving, then if this is truly a mathematical equation, there wouldn't be any discontentedness. So when you fully arise wisdom and you experience no discontentedness for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, that's how you know you've completely dismantled this. And now it'll never be rebuilt again, because the mind is too wise at that point. It just can't ever become polluted ever again. Because think about, say it takes you 5-10 years to get to enlightenment. Part of getting to enlightenment, you're going to see not only is your mind peaceful and joyful, but all your relationships are harmonious, right? And you've done that through this gradual training of your mind, gradual development of your mind. Think about all the times you've meditated up to this point, right? And there's a whole lot more for you to do. And think about all the relationships that you're going to need to clean up and develop and cultivate in order to get to this enlightened mental state where now all your relationships are harmonious. You're not going to be like, you know what? I kind of liked it when I was angry. I kind of liked it when I yelled at people and people yelled at me. That was kind of fun. No, because now you're living a life where you don't yell at anyone, you don't argue with anyone, you're not harsh with anyone, and nobody's harsh with you, or very rarely is somebody harsh with you. 99.9% of the time, everything's, people are treating you wonderfully. But you're going to have that occasional brand new relationship where you meet someone and they're going to be bitter and harsh, but then you're going to know, like, this isn't the life I'm interested in, and you'll just continue to walk on from that relationship while still maintaining your love and kindness for that person. But you're not going to get to a point where you've fully created this wonderful ideal life for yourself with peace and joy and harmonious relationships. You're like, I kind of liked it when I was angry and I was bitter and I was harsh, and I used to stay awake at night having difficulty sleeping, and my mind was just obsessively thinking about things. Your mind's not going to have the ability to go back to that, because you can't reinsert ignorance back into your mind. Because once you've seen the truth, you've seen the truth. You can't go back to ignorance again. It just, the mind won't do it. It's kind of like the example I give you, like, I think, did you grow up with Santa Claus in your culture? Or at least the understanding of Santa Claus? You can't ever believe in Santa Claus ever again. At one time you did, but then you got the truth. And now your mind is unshakable and steady on that topic. You can't ever go back to believing in Santa Claus again. So one of the wisdoms that you come to through the Four Noble Truths is that your mind is causing your own discontentedness. And once you see the truth in that and you can independently verify it, you'll never go back to believing that somebody else is causing you to be angry. You'll never go back to that because you've seen the truth so clearly that it's your own mind that's causing these feelings. And once you do that, your mind can never think any other way because you've independently verified it 100%.
Yeah, thanks. That helps with the single life view, but does, I guess, the multi-life view, like what comes next is undeclared? Is that the...
After enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an undeclared teaching. And it's important that it stays an undeclared teaching, because if somebody declares what's next, they have no way of independently verifying that because they've never been enlightened and actually experienced it. So the way that you can know something is through experience. That's how you know what is true. But then also, if you're teaching something that's true, it needs to be independently verified. And you can't independently verify it. As long as you're alive, you can't independently verify it. So get to the point where the mind's so peaceful and so joyful that the mind's enlightened, where you don't care what's next, if there is or isn't something next. And now when the mind's enlightened, okay, now you'll experience whatever comes next. And then you'll know the truth for yourself. But you're not going to be coming back into the world to explain it to anybody else by that point because you've escaped the cycle of rebirth.
Thank you, David.
So the person's enlightenment isn't dependent on knowing what's next. Your enlightenment is based on getting to peace and joy now, purifying the mind of all this unknowing of true reality, this lack of wisdom and ignorance.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Leo, have another question?
We know, so enlightened beings might know what is next. So we can we can say, okay, it will be something nice next. That's for sure. Because if we don't know what is next, could be also something worse after that.
An enlightened being is only going to speak the truth, and the way that they know of that truth is through direct experience. And an enlightened being has never died and experienced what comes next. So even if they have a clue of something that might come next, they don't know it to be 100% true because they haven't actually experienced it. So they're not going to speak that. And also, if they've learned with the teachings of the Buddha and they understand how important it is to leave it as an undeclared teaching, they're not going to change the teachings of the Buddha. They're like, hey, the Buddha didn't teach this, but I'm going to teach you this. That would be the person's ego and arrogance coming in. The Buddha didn't teach this, but I'm wiser than him, and let me make sure I teach it to you. The Buddha intentionally left it as an undeclared teaching for a reason. So you shouldn't think that there is something next or there isn't something next. Just understand it's an undeclared teaching. You would like to get to peace and joy now in the present moment.
Okay. No, I understand that it's important not to tell unenlightened beings what is next. But that doesn't mean that maybe enlightened people know that. Maybe through God, maybe they ask God or something.
Again, an enlightened being isn't going to teach anything that hasn't been independently verified and that their students can't independently verify. Right? If somebody's sharing something with you that, hey, this is what I think is going to happen after death, then that's a belief, because they haven't actually experienced it themselves. And now their student has no way to independently verify it themselves, so they're not speaking the truth at that point. So they're not going to say those things. Right? And then it would also be one's own arrogance and ego, because now they're saying, oh, the Buddha taught it, left it as undeclared teaching, but now I'm going to share it instead.
I think you misunderstood. I didn't mean that they would tell us. My question was just if they know it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if just that some enlightened beings have a thought about how it could be, and you said, that they might have, but they don't tell us, and that's understandable why they don't tell us.
Well, they could have thoughts about it, but that doesn't make it true, right? Because you can't know that something's true until you experience it. So that's why an enlightened being just wouldn't speak it, even if they thought like, oh, this is maybe what's going to happen after enlightenment. have no way of knowing that's true or false. So they're not even going to speak it or share it if that's their thought or their inclination. Because for every single being, there can be a different thought about what is next, right? Because of impermanence, not everybody's going to think the same way. So rather than muddy the waters, an enlightened being is going to have nothing but respect and gratitude for the Buddha and how the Buddha taught these teachings, and they're going to leave his teachings intact the way they are. Because one of the things that the Buddha taught was if you change his teachings, it's for your harm and for the harm of many, many people. Because as soon as you change a Buddha's teachings, then it makes enlightenment impossible for others. So this is why a person who's getting to enlightenment would keep the teachings of the Buddha exactly the way they are. And since he taught it as an undeclared teaching, that's another reason why they wouldn't teach it. Okay. So, we have one more thing. I have Helena here. Go ahead, ma'am.
I'm really sorry, but please, once again, why is it that wise choices and decisions of an enlightened being don't result in consciousness?
Because they have eliminated ignorance. They're not making decisions through ignorance. It's the decisions through ignorance that are leading to consciousness. Wise decisions wouldn't lead to a new consciousness because part of that ignorance is that the mind's still going to have craving and anger there. And craving, that longing, yearning, that holding on, that's the fuel that leads to rebirth. So if you get rid of dependent origination for a moment and just think, what is it that leads to rebirth? Well, it's craving. It's the longing, it's the yearning, it's the holding on. That's what leads to rebirth. Well, why is craving there? Oh, because of ignorance. You can see the detailed here. There's a lot of steps between ignorance and craving, but the whole reason why craving exists is because of ignorance. So if you eradicate ignorance, now your decisions are based in wisdom. So it's not going to have any craving to be able to produce a next life.
Okay, finally got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, let me just check Facebook. I don't see anything in YouTube. Okay, so now I've just got a few more things. I already introduced you guys to these things. These are all in Volume 5, Chapter 14, even these charts. So you guys can see this, and I describe it in detail in description form about dependent origination. So ultimately, what you come to the conclusion of when you understand the detail of dependent origination is it's the cultivation of wisdom that completely unravels dependent origination. And this is why you should never believe anything. You're not interested in believing anything about the teachings of the Buddha because belief doesn't lead to wisdom. And this is why he didn't teach rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship, right? Because that's all based in belief. It's all about training your mind and getting to wisdom. And rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship doesn't lead to wisdom. So you can't dismantle dependent origination and getting to enlightenment through rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. It's through cultivation of wisdom. So you're going to need to stay dedicated to developing your life practice to that whenever somebody says something, if there's something you don't understand, you ask questions and work towards independently verifying it. And that's what you guys all did here today, that as you were introduced to dependent origination, you didn't believe it, you questioned it, you investigated it. And this is what the Buddha teaches you. You can see in his own words that he guides students to investigate and examine his teachings. You'll never hear anywhere in the teachings of the Buddha where he says, just believe me. Just believe me. He says the opposite. He says, come examine my teachings. Come investigate them. Because if you come investigate his teachings and you look at them deep enough, it's going to lead to the elimination of discontentedness. It's only a matter of time. Through training your mind, you'll see your sadness and anger and frustration and all those other discontent feelings gradually eliminate through training the mind. So it's the cultivation of wisdom that leads to all of that. And that's why from the very beginning, first class that a student learns with me, that's what I teach them, is not to believe anything that I share, that you need to independently verify these teachings to get to wisdom. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a break for you guys. It's 5 minutes after 11. You have a question? No? Okay, you have another one?
Yeah, just thought about, you say that enlightenment is permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So there must be something after that, right? If enlightenment is permanent? Or?
The mind is permanently enlightened, meaning that it will never again experience discontentedness. It's unconditioned. You're going to need to let go of wanting to know what's next. You're going to need to let go of that. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break here. It's basically 5 minutes after 11. So let's come back at 11:20, which will give us a 15-minute break. And when we come back, I'm going to teach you guys about this fetter now of ignorance. Now that you understand dependent origination to a certain level of detail, we can jump into this fetter and I can talk to you about it in more detail. Okay, so enjoy your break and we'll see you guys afterwards.